If you've ever felt like your emotions are too much to carry, like your life is either so intense or falling apart, if you constantly just feel not okay and are just desperate to feel okay, if you feel like your emotions are totally overwhelming and yet you also somehow still feel empty, like too much and also not enough, this video is for you. This video is not going to solve that. This video is not going to magically take away that pain. But I want to talk about this pattern that I see over and over with teen girls and young women that I work with, and a pattern that I know because I also lived it myself. When I say pattern, I'm not talking about a diagnosis or a label or a box to put someone in. I'm talking about a recognizable, repeated pattern, a kind of emotional circuitry that shows up again and again. It's a mix of behavior and emotional wiring and core beliefs that tend to go together. It's marked by emotional intensity, urgency, sensitivity, emptiness, craving, and this deep fear of abandonment alongside this deep, deep, urgent need for connection. So I want to talk about what it is actually like to live this way, what it feels like to have this be your emotional landscape and the setting from which you live life. The first part of this, where I think it really all begins, like where this all stems from, is that people who struggle with this pattern feel a profound sense of emptiness. Now, I know that can sound like an oxymoron because profound is usually describing something, saying it's great or it's intense. And so you might wonder, well, how can nothing be great or intense if there's nothing there, if it's emptiness that we're talking about here? But you know, the oxymoron, a loud silence, like that sounds like an oxymoron, but maybe you've experienced a loud silence where the silence itself was noticeable, like almost ringing in your ears, the absence of sound. Like if someone had just said something really impactful, or if it was notable that no one was saying something, the silence itself was loud. So this emptiness is profound because it is consuming. It is overwhelming. It is so heavy. It feels like being full of nothing, like it totally overtakes your senses. This feeling of emptiness. It's not just the absence of something, it's the presence of that absence, that feeling of just total hopelessness, spiritual desolation, of hollowness. And it's so uncomfortable, that feeling of emptiness. It just feels wrong, it just feels off. And because a person feels that way in themselves, that is their experience of their body and their mind, is this deep emptiness. They feel broken. I felt broken. I felt wrong. It made being alone feel unbearable for me because being alone meant sitting in that feeling, sitting still and alone meant sitting in that feeling. So you can imagine the kind of urgency that this creates in a person, the kind of desperation that this creates in a person to be escaping that feeling, to be escaping themselves, to be out in the world searching for anything that might fill that void they feel. Many people with this pattern, like me, they may run away from home, or they just might always be gone. Like I was literally always somewhere. I was always out of the house, always trying to go somewhere or meet someone or do something. And if I didn't have plans, I remember I would just want to go and ride the bus. Or I grew up in San Francisco, I would take the bus to some part of town and just want to walk around in the hopes of encountering something or someone, because I was just desperately trying to not be alone with myself and was hopeful that there was something that was going to take this feeling away. I didn't connect those dots. I wasn't doing this consciously. I didn't realize, oh wow, it's so uncomfortable to be alone with myself and feel the horrible way that I feel when I'm by myself. So that's why I'm always trying to outrun that. I did not have any conscious thought or plan. It was just pure need that was driving me. So this emptiness leads to a feeling of hunger, an insatiable hunger that has us always out in the world trying to find food to eat. But the thing is, when you are starving, you don't have discernment about the food that you eat. A starving person is not a picky eater. And bear with me because I am going to continue this food metaphor for a while because I love metaphors, but I'm sorry if it's too corny for you. So starving person, not a very picky eater. When you're so hungry that your stomach is hurting because of how hungry you are, you're not thinking about the nutritional value of the food you're eating or the flavor profile, or if it's a taste that you really like. You're just so hungry that you're going to eat whatever's in front of you. So I didn't think about if something was good or healthy for me to do. I was just seizing any morsel or crumb that came my way. And food in this analogy metaphor is that feeling that we're looking for, that feeling of being okay, that validation, that closeness, that belonging. So some examples of this: sneaking out and going to a party or going to meet up with someone because I couldn't bear just being alone in my room wanting to die. Or lying to my parents. I made up that there was some exemption. I think I made this up. Or if I didn't make it up completely, I definitely modified it. But telling my parents that if I had a note from my principal that I would be allowed to drive the car to school, even though I didn't have a license, just because I wanted that. I just wanted to be out more than anything, out doing things with my friends, not at home, not with myself. Letting people treat me badly because it felt better than being alone. Blowing off everything that I need to do because someone just asked me to hang out and I'm starving. So I'm going to go because maybe I'll be able to eat there. So hunger messes with our taste. It clouds our judgment and our discernment. When you're starving, you don't stop to read the ingredients label. You just eat something. I would chase intensity. I would chase closeness. I would chase chaos, not because it was good for me, because it felt like something, and something was better than nothing. Anything was better than that feeling of emptiness. So here is the other part of what happens when we are driven by this hunger. It creates a life that is very painful to be in. And this whole thing started because it was painful to be alone with ourselves with this emptiness. But when we're living from that hunger and having intense, unsafe, chaotic experiences and relationships, that makes it continuously more difficult to be in the reality of our own life. So life was a cycle of intensity, crash, recovery, repeat. I would be going at full speed, going to all these events and places, trying to keep up all of these lies I told my parents, which takes a lot of energy to keep up a bunch of lies, trying to keep all these plates spinning and going, trying to maintain all these relationships with people, being there for them, seeing them, running around, just trying to do all of this stuff. And then inevitably at some point I would crash. I would get to a point where I felt so emotionally burnt out, so depleted, so down on myself, and I would end up in the ER because I would feel suicidal, and I needed to escape what I was dealing with. I would cut myself. I would try and run away. I would get to a point where I couldn't hold the intensity, the pace of the life that I created anymore. And then I would just collapse emotionally. I would crash. So I'd end up in the ER because that was usually where I would go. I felt suicidal a lot of the time because I just felt like I can't, life is just too painful. It's too painful and I can't do it. And when I get to a place where I felt that hopeless and depleted, it would feel like my only option. So I would be in the ER. I would make promises to my parents, try to patch things up with them, try to promise myself it's going to be different this time. But inevitably, that cycle would repeat itself because recovery, healing requires some level of stillness, of being with ourselves. And I never gave myself time to recover. I was always on to the next thing because that was how I cope. That's how a lot of people who struggle with this pattern cope, is we just cover it up with more. But that pain just compounded. Every one of those crashes would become another layer of evidence to me that I was broken and that I was not okay. And every time I had one of those crashes, there was so much to deal with when I finally was getting back on my feet. I had missed school and was behind. I had had to stay in the hospital and now things were tense at home. I had a fallout with a friend. There was always more and more to deal with when I tried to tap back in and re-engage with my life. And what was happening was it was making my life ever more painful to actually be in because I was having all of these crashes that were creating more mess and more shame each and every time. And that would be too much for me. So again, I would be trying to escape because all of this is happening, which is too much to deal with, too much to face. So that just fuels, again, that urgency and that need to be escaping and running. It was never just the pain of that most recent thing. It was like everything just kept getting stacked on top of each other. And so trying to re-enter life and deal with all of this, it just felt impossible. So I'm going to do everything that I can to not have to do that, to just keep running and moving, to keep moving at all costs. One thing I want to add to this is now that I'm older, I can understand how confusing this seemed to the people around me. It just seemed so irrational and dramatic and impulsive. And they were often trying to help me, but it didn't register with me as they were trying to help me. I often felt like everyone was against me, everyone was my enemy, because they were trying to interfere with what I felt like was my only lifeline. I was just in this state of pure suffering, trying to find some way out. And it felt like someone was coming along and taking this IV drip, like ripping it out of my arm because they thought it was poison. And I'm like pleading with them, like, no, that's medicine. Like that is keeping me here. What are you doing? The IV drip is a very accurate image for this because it speaks to that sense of survival. It was just keeping me alive. But when someone lives that way, we have different standards for our life. Like it wasn't even in the realm of possibility or thought for me that I could be building a life that felt good, that I could be proud of, that felt healthy and right for me. That wasn't even on my radar. I was just trying to not die. When someone came in and tried to help me, it didn't feel like they were trying to help me. It felt like they were trying to stop me from helping myself. Another thing we have to talk about with this pattern is the need to be loved. People who struggle with this pattern, with this profile, what they want more than anything in the world is to be loved, to finally be seen and understood and valued and not abandoned. And that need to be loved factors into all of the areas I have described so perfectly because we want to feel relief from that emptiness that we feel when we're alone. And there's this urgency and intensity to how we act in the world because of it. And what most of us believe is that another person, there is a person out there who is going to heal, fix, take away this deep loneliness inside. If I can finally find someone who I am chosen by, who doesn't leave me, who always stays, then I'm not going to feel so horrible. That being with them is going to finally make being with ourselves feel okay. That hunger is going to finally go away when we meet them. To find that other person, to be with that other person, we would leave everything behind. All of our other responsibilities, our dreams and plans, even ourselves. We will leave behind ourselves to find this other person. We'll ignore signs that we shouldn't. We'll suppress our own needs. We'll pretend to be someone that we're not if we think it's going to make this other person happy, if it means that we might finally be loved and be chosen. Because that need to be close to someone feels like a need as strong as the need for oxygen. I remember feeling like I was drowning on dry land. I just wanted to be able to breathe. And the attention, the closeness, the validation, the presence of another person, the other person felt like it was oxygen, like I could finally breathe. And if you relate to this and you struggle with this pattern, you probably know it becomes a very painful cycle because we're usually attracted to people and end up with people who, because we don't have that discernment and because we're operating from the setting of life being chaotic, intense, painful, we attract people who match that. And we attract people who can't really meet us because we can't ever meet ourselves. We attract people who don't treat us as if we're worthy because we don't believe that we're worthy. And when we are in a relationship with someone, it activates all of our trauma. Like all of your trauma comes aggressively online when you're in a relationship, which makes it so difficult and chaotic. And then they usually explode or implode. So the relationships become very painful and then they end. And then each one of those relationships becomes another layer of evidence for us about how we're not lovable, we're not worthy. And that is a very painful story to have. It becomes a story that the thing that we want more than anything else in the world, that we believe and hope and pray is going to heal us and make us feel okay, is the one thing that we can't have. So imagine how hopeless you would feel. It's the thing that you always mess up. It's the thing that you're too broken to really receive. It's the thing that you're not worthy of. And you have so much evidence to prove that point, to back up that feeling of hopelessness about it. And that brings us to the last part of this pattern, the beliefs that we have about ourselves, the stories that we tell ourselves through and because of this cycle. There were many times where I would be talking to a therapist or a friend of mine, and I would almost feel like I was a lawyer who was making a case, like arguing the case that I was unlovable and broken and not okay. And I had a mountain of evidence. So many stories and data points that I could show them to prove my point that I was broken and unlovable. Because to me, I just did not know what other conclusion I could possibly draw when I had all of this proof. And with that belief as my foundation, because it felt so true, so proven, and so real, you can imagine the kind of choices that I would make and how I felt about myself as a result. Every time something went wrong, someone pulled away, I got too intense, things blew up or fell apart, I would look at it and say, see, there it happens again. That is even more proof that it's true. And when that starts to feel inevitable, like it's just a given that I'm going to mess everything up, that just adds fuel to the fire. Let me reach for someone else to fix it, to prove it wrong, to rescue me from this feeling that I'm so terrified might actually be true. If you're at all like me and you relate to this, maybe you also arrived at that same conclusion, that the only explanation is that you're broken and unlovable. And I'm here to tell you, to promise you that there is another explanation. This happening in your life is not proof of brokenness. It might be the result of what you've learned to expect and then unconsciously recreate. And there's so much more to unpack around that I will get into in another video. But if there's anything you take away from this video, please know that there is nothing wrong with you and that what you want is available to you. It's not impossible, even if you haven't had it yet. So in essence, what all of this boils down to is we are just trying to feel okay when we have never felt okay. For so long, I was doing everything I could to not be in my mind and my body, to not be with myself. That was the engine driving so many of my choices. And what drives you gets reflected in your life. My life was a picture of all of that pain and emptiness that I felt. When that's driving you, that deep ache, that fear that you're unlovable or you're broken or you're too much, that shapes everything. And what that also means is that something else can start to shape your life. Think about how much strength it takes to keep living when life feels this painful. How resilient you are to still be here today when you've felt this way your whole life. Think about how creative you have to be to keep coming up with things and finding a way to make them happen. I remember my therapist in Wilderness jokingly saying, you have to learn how to use your powers for good, because if you relate to this, if you have this pattern, you have an insane amount of power. Like, you can influence things, you make stuff happen, you are super creative, super resilient, super adaptable. Like, you're unconquerable. There is a part of you that is just unstoppable. So you have the power. You always have and you always will. It's about learning how to use it in a way that is going to actually give you the life that you want. It's going to actually help you build a life that you want to be in. If this video was helpful for you, please share it with a friend. If there's someone you know who you think can relate to this, who could benefit from hearing about it, please send it their way. If you are interested in more information about the work I do, I offer support groups for teenagers and young adults, and I work with teenagers and young adults individually as well. I have a parent support group. I'll put the links to everything below. And if you have any questions or comments, I would be delighted to hear them from you. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.